In this lesson, we're going to create a SqlLite database. In the previous lesson, we used the SqlLite Open Helper to create our database for us. In this lesson, we're going to use straight .NET database calls. Our form will look like this, and we're actually going to be using it in the next two lessons. We have a button to create the database, and a little button just to prove that we did. In the second lesson, we'll be using the update and delete buttons. The first thing we need to do is to add some references. So we have some references to monodata SqlLite and monodata TDS, and then we have to add the system data reference, which is not in there by default. We add our using statements for those references, and we're off to the races. We've put in our button click handlers, and the first one creates the database. We give the database a name. If you remember, it's a file-based system, so we have a file called my database, db3, and then we look for a doc folder to be in the system environment special folder personal area. So this is a particular area that this application can use. We just combine those to create our database path, and that gives us a full path to where we want to put the database. I've put this in for example. You may or may not use it in production code, but essentially if this file exists, we're just going to delete it and recreate it. So, if the file does not exist, we use a SqlLite connection to create the file in the path that we specified. And then we call our createDatabase method, passing in the database path. And this is where we start to get into normal .NET database code. The first thing we do is we create a SqlLite connection using the connection string data source equal and our database path. Then we create a command object using the connection create command method. The command type is going to be command type text, and we'll open our connection. And our first command, we're going to create a table if it doesn't exist called state, and we'll have a state ID with an integer type, which will be our primary key, and we'll auto increment that. Auto increments on SqlLite only work on integer fields. You can't do them on big ints. And then we'll have the state name as a varchar 50. And we'll simply execute that query. Next, we'll create our customers table. We'll use a customer ID, a first name, a last name, phone, address, the normal sorts of fields. And we'll set up a foreign key to our state ID in the state table. And we'll execute that. Then we'll create an index on the last name and customers, and that will speed searches. And then we'll insert a couple of records into the state table. We'll insert the state Virginia and the state Maryland. Obviously, we'll need to do a few more inserts into that table in the future. We'll then close the connection and go to insert some more customer data. We'll talk about the inserts in the next lesson, so let's take a look at it running. And here's our form. We'll create our database. And at the end of it, I've got a little notice that the commands are complete. And the Prove It button is just going to do a select statement on some of those inserted records. So we'll just click on that to prove that the database was actually created. And sure enough, it was. I've got a couple of records for names in there. So that's how to create our database. In the next lesson, we're going to talk more about those inserts and updates, selects, and deletes.